OS 2200 QProcessor 2.0 Configuring HA Resources. Here we are looking at a QProcessor cluster using the MQadmin user ID. This user ID can do anything particular to MQ. So as you see, that after initially configuring the system, the next step is to add MQ storage groups. Now, MQ storage groups have been previously defined with the Configure External Storage module. The first thing you do is enter a resource group name. This name represents a collection of resources controlled together by the HA cluster. Typically, we usually put a name that designates the 2200 system that these resources are associated with. The access point is going to default to whatever the access point is on this particular system. The storage groups will be listed depending on what you have configured. You can pick one or more. In this case, we're going to add the default one. And the preferred system is what host these resources will be pinned to. Once the resource group is created, we can then add our MQ resources. Now, the QAdmin user ID cannot add MQ storage groups or MQ resources. This is only a function of the MQadmin. You can change the behavior of which administrators get to control which functions on the Manage HA page by using the root user in the webmin configuration, and that will be a topic of a different demo. When we add MQ resources, the Add MQ Resource page displays the queue managers associated with the storage group. We have the option of adding a queue manager and then either their brokers, channel initiators, listeners, or trigger monitors. In this case, we'll add all these resources and their objects for the DR QM. We can add multiple listeners if desired, multiple trigger monitors, and multiple channel initiators. We may need to edit some of the properties before adding the resource. The listener port, for instance, may have already been used. In our case, we will use the existing listener port. The Allow Failure Migration allows us to decide whether this resource is important enough to control failure migration. So what this means is if the listener fails to start or encounters 5 errors within our configured timeout, which is 60 seconds, the listener, the QM, the file systems, and all the network access points will stop and restart on the other system. If the failure migration stays at no, it means that this resource can fail but will not affect the operations of the group. The monitor time is how often do you want to check this particular resource for health. We default it to 60 seconds. The timeout means that if the monitor action is called by the cluster software and in 45 seconds it doesn't receive a reply, it sets the resource as dead, stops it, and tries to restart it. The start timeout works similarly. If it cannot be started within this amount of time, the resource will be killed and then restarted. So you'll want to time your start timeout in accordance with how long it typically takes your particular queue manager, in this case the listener. Well, the listener, of course, will start soon, but the queue manager may need a little more time when it replays all its log records. The stop, again, how long will it take to stop the resource? If the stop time's out, your whole node will be reset. Stop timeouts are treated as critical errors with the cluster. So we can save the listener. We can go in, likewise, and edit the channel initiator if we need to set the initiation queue name or set any of the tuning values here. Similarly, for the trigger monitor, you can set the initiation queue name or any of the timeouts or the failure properties. When we're satisfied with what we want to add to the cluster, we can simply select Save. This warning tells us that we have to ensure that the 2200 background daemon is running if we're using user-defined trigger monitors, just to remind. The last configuration item we'll take a look at is configuring the network access points. This is available by default with the QAdmin user ID. Remember, we said that the QAdmin user ID handles network and the total cluster configuration, where the MQAdmin is allowed to do things with resources particular to MQ, namely the file system and the queue managers themselves. So the access points, if we wanted to add a public IPv4 address, we would simply select the Add Public v4 action link, and in the drop-down will be all public v4 addresses that are already configured on this particular node. So we're going to select this address. The failure properties can be manipulated if you would like as to what your threshold is in a failure in this particular resource. So remember that the network resources are protected mostly by the hardware redundancies itself, and the cluster provides a backup for that. You can also adjust the monitor intervals and the start and stop timeouts. And this completes this demo.